Alaska, back with some more reading for us, as I love to do. Thinking back, I never really, never really loved to read all that much. And then for a short time I did, and then I kind of fell into the bad scene, the wrong people. And then when I became Christian again, I started to read because I just wanted to surround myself with God's presence and to think about Him and to keep learning as much as I can. So now I do a lot of reading, in case you haven't noticed. But I still struggle because I'm a wretched and unworthy sinner. So I'm here by myself in my log cabin. And really all I do is work, go to church, or I come home and do some reading. I try to separate myself from the secular world because there was so much negative temptation in it for me. I don't want to end up going to the bars or ending up in a bad relationship because of my loneliness. So I pray to God to guide me in everything that I do, as much as I can remember to, because sometimes I fall into delusion and despair. And then people remind me to get back on track. That's why it's important to stay in church. There's a lot of spiritual warfare that comes your way when you become a Christian. It's not an easy path like some of the prosperity preachers would have you believe. It's not about giving someone money or just accepting God into your life. It's about learning how to carry your cross. And it's a continual learning. Learning doesn't stop. It just goes on and on. We learn how to carry our cross. And we learn how weak that we really are because we can't carry it on our own. Without Jesus, we can do nothing, but with Him, we can do all things. Strength is made perfect in weakness. And that's something that's almost indoctrinated out of us as young men in America, as young men and women. We're taught to take pride in things, while pride is a sin. Should be giving glory to God. So I'm going to do some readings for us, and the first reading that I'm going to do tonight is called Time of the White Cat by Marina Biryukova. I can't believe it's already in the past. It's time that I am no longer in it, that I'm going on. Where am I going, to what? How important it is not just to swim with the flow of time, but to move toward the goal. Consciously chosen and having enduring significance. With age, the energy of directed movement should increase. Realizing that you have little time left, you walk in a hurry if you walk at all. The white cat died in March when the snow had already melted and the starlings had arrived. He was only 5 years old. Most likely he did not suffer from ordinary distemper. 5 years of our life together, how many they contain. My cousin Sveta brought us a kitten, white and fluffy like a dandelion, at the end of summer of 2020. It was a very difficult year for everyone. For me, doubly. A common misfortune is the pandemic and the so-called restrictions. My personal one is my mother's stroke, plus my father's sharp decrepitude. He suddenly became a helpless child. I had to change my way of life, move from the city to my native village, to the house where I grew up. My parents could no longer be left alone. Sveta, what are you talking about? We don't have time for kittens. Completely. Where should I put it? Let him live. How will he interfere with you? The attitude toward cats in the village is much simpler than in the city. Here they really do not bother anyone much, do not require much attention, walk on their own, eat everything in a row, in a word. They are in natural conditions for themselves. But this is not the main thing. The main thing is that my poor mother, bedridden by a stroke, immediately fell in love with this kitten. An unbroken chain of cats and dogs stretched through her entire rural life. She even once wrote down her dogs in a notebook in a column with a simple pencil with approximate dates as far as she could remember. Bug 1953 to 67, Chijik 59 through 70, Jim, Bagel, Mika. I didn't enumerate the cats because there were too many of them. Up to 5 at a time, go count them. But this white cat was the last cat on her earthly path, and she understood this. 5 years of life, this is a lot. They have already passed these years, and no one will return them to you, so you can correct your mistakes. You can correct something only in the present and only in yourself. And it is not necessary to correct something in oneself in order not to repeat one's mistakes in the future. Our mistakes are as unique as the past days, hours, and minutes. You need to change at least something in yourself in order to enter the kingdom. I have no illusions about myself anymore. I know about myself that my hair stands on end. 3 years with my dying mother gave me this knowledge. My egoism reached the point of wishing for my mother's death. As the end of this hard, unfree life, I am afraid to realize that this desire lived in me. Yet it lived, and if I did not die from this, if the Lord prolonged my days and gave me a chance, it was only because every evening in front of the icons I repeated, Lord, heal me from this thought, help me change, make me different. This prayer helped me become different. I repeat to this day, and I will repeat it as long as I have at least an hour left on earth. In an hour, everything can change for a person. I ask for help and hope for help. What I am now could make me go crazy if it were not for Christ. During these 3 years, over the next 2, already without my mother, but with guilt before her, he came closer to me than ever before, for he is a friend of publicans and sinners. Matthew 11:19. My mother's poem. Let's not talk about separation. It is near and inevitable. You smile casually and stretch out your hands to me. Let's not talk about trouble. Trouble, she does not walk alone. She both breeds and breeds. We are on her lead. Let's not talk about love. We have already talked about it. We have fallen in love. We have suffered. Why should we start all over again? Let's not talk about ourselves, about dreams, illnesses, all sorts of nonsense, about an old unforgotten quarrel, about a changeable fate. We'd better be silent together. In silence there is charm. In it memory sleeps sweetly. We don't talk about it either. A nimble kitten who gave us lots of fun moments grew into a lush snow white beauty, smart, surprisingly well-mannered, and infinitely loving. He really helped me in difficult days and nights torn apart by my mother's screams. My father was no longer there. The white cat knew when to approach, to climb on his knees, snuggle up, lick his cheek. It warmed and soothed, and in good moments my mother said with surprise, "Wow, what a miracle we have grown." Or look how yellow his eyes are, give him something tastier. At that moment we were both laughing and moving away from the tension, from our constant latent conflict. My mother believed that I should now give up my job and belong entirely to the house and hers. But I could not do without my work. As the old Soviet song sang, the earth cannot but rotate, the pilot cannot help flying. Moral arguments did not work on my mother, and I switched to material ones. And how are we going to live on then? Do you think my pension won't be enough to be economical? In addition, my mother did not understand the need to attend church so often, and this caused me, who could no longer imagine my life without the church and the Eucharist, constant pain. However, I do not want to dive into the details of our disputes. Looking back on the months and years of my mother's illness, I want to find joy there. Joy, love, friendship. Find these bright moments and keep them in front of your eyes. Ask yourself and maybe her, do you remember? Do you remember how I saved the hedgehog from our dog and brought him to show you? Do you remember the swans? In June, a swan kept on our pond in a ring of tall reeds. No one knew what he was doing here, why he didn't fly away, until she got out of the reed thicket into clear water with a brood, with 4 olive-gray babies, and the powerful, formidable dad took the family under his vigilant protection. These swans were saved by reeds. No dog would have approached the birds through these shaky thickets. Local residents were proud of the swan family and shared their observations on rural internet pages. There was enough food in the old pond. The chicks grew by leaps and bounds, and by autumn, they turned into huge gray geese. And turns out that these birds put on white clothes only in the second year of their life. Young swans are gray, really like geese. I didn't keep track when they got on the wing and flew away. Mom felt bad more and more often. The driver of the local ambulance said, "At least don't leave you." But I regularly photographed swans and showed my mother these shots. She looked at me and smiled a little. But how much did they help her, these birds? I know that there comes a time when nothing pleases a person, neither cherry blossoms, nor golden branches, nor fluffy snowfall, no birds, no animals, no trees, no poems. Because all this is no longer for them, because they leave, and that's all that stays. It remains for others who are still given to live. Is it possible that one day such a time will come for me, and I can't support myself and revive myself with anything? Could it be that I, like my mother, would one day begin to talk and to cease to understand where I was? You don't have to live to a ripe old age. Something terrible can happen to you earlier. During the time of the white cat, during these 5 years, I lost several friends, peers, a little older, a little younger, cancer, perforation of the ulcer, peritonitis, transient cirrhosis, sudden stroke. The shells fell all around me. Perhaps not so that I could finally really read this terrible triad of the consequences of the fall of man: passion, decay, and mortality. Passion is susceptibility to suffering. Decay is the inevitability of age-related changes. Mortality is understandable. I read it, saw it, and what's next? Do you have to live on? But what does it mean to live? People perceive and live their lives too differently. I remember that my grandmother's younger sister, who was visiting us, admitted that it was very difficult for her to accept her aging and the inevitability of her death. Grandmother answered, "Don't think about it. I've already accustomed myself to live one day today. You get up in the morning, you have something to do, so you do them, and you don't think about what will happen next. You go to bed, wake up in the morning, here's another day, again business, and that's it." Yes, many people live one day at a time, and with his worries trying not to think about the bad, but how wrong it is. The Lord does not grant us earthly time so that we may while it away, living one day at a time and deliberately extinguishing our awareness. To live with full awareness of the fragility and frailty of our lives, the horror of those misfortunes, those sufferings that await everyone on the earthly path, the transience of time, the inevitability of aging and death, and his own sinfulness. To live responding to God every day for his gift, fulfilling his plan, put into every creature. This is what a person needs. And when you at least try to live like this, you understand that there are no trifles for you. God has no small things at all. There is little, but there is no small. Soon after my father's death, my mother suddenly said, "It seems to me that this cat will end his days somewhere in the garbage, abandoned, useless to anyone." "Why do you think so?" "Well, you won't sit here because of him. If I am gone, you will sell the house, go to the city." "What are you saying, Mom? I have never left a single animal in my life. If I leave here, I'll take him with me." "Yes, you will, of course," my mother sighed, trying to calm herself down. But after my mother's death, everything turned out differently. Once I took the cat with me to the city. I hoped that he would somehow adapt to the conditions of the apartment. The experiment failed. The 3-year-old village cat did not know how to use the litter box, but he was not able to anywhere due to his innate upbringing and responsibility. 3 days later, I had to urgently return him to his native soil before he died from stress and intestinal blockage. Now I sometimes say to myself or to someone else that just because of the cat, just so that he would not end his days in the garbage dump and die in the unacceptable conditions of the city, I would never sell my parents' house. A cat as a reason would be enough. God has small things, but not small things. A cat is small in comparison with a person, yes, but not small, no. The significance of this or that being object or phenomenon in our fate is determined not by an objective criteria, but by the place they occupy in our main spiritual life. The scale of this life will never coincide with the worldly scale of significance, and still I have more reasons than a cat. The house that I've now inherited is accompanied by the so called summer kitten, once built of soft shell rock and now almost collapsed. A haven for things that have not been thrown away. There are stacks of books like the poets of revolutionary Cuba. There are rusted garden buckets and watering cans, a box with old shoes, an ancient black kitchen cabinet with some dishes. In the black cabinet, I found my grandfather's cup. It is as wide as a pelvis, white, and you can see the blue flowers on it. Except for my grandfather, no one drank tea from it. This was out of the question, and not because of any special importance of this cup for my grandfather. No, because of the rejection of my grandfather and our family and the complete separation of his life from the lives of others. Although it seems to me my grandfather really wanted and tried to live normally with everyone, he did not love his grandmother. But she did everything so that he did not love her. She was not happy with him. Yes, they had big problems in their youth and midlife, but perhaps it was better to disperse than to live for decades in a regime of continuous scandal and petty revenge for a ruined life. As a child, I got used to the fact that my grandfather and grandmother were constantly fighting, and I almost didn't notice it. I was not taught to love my grandfather. No, the word grandfather itself was not in our everyday life. My grandmother had no one to express her grievances against my grandfather to, and she reprimanded me starting from my preschool age. I should have known that my grandfather was bad, and I knew it. But she knew something else from the same grandmother. How confused they were during the war. Their grandmother and children were evacuated to Siberia. Their grandfather stayed in Leningrad, and how their grandfather then searched for them and found them by some miracle at the Taiga station of Talmenka. How he saved them from starvation because he always knew how to get food, at least just grain barley, which my grandmother soaked and ground and cooked porridge from. We all lived in the house that my grandfather built, at the cost of a severe reprimand on the party line, for the fact that he was not concerned about the public, the director of the pig farm, but about the personal building a house for his family. However, the house was and is and in a beautiful place near the pond. We all lived in this house. We all ate potatoes that my grandfather grew in the garden. But my grandfather never received gratitude from us. My father could not stand his father in law, although his father in law did nothing bad to him. Mummy, I know she repented of her attitude towards her father. Before his death, my grandfather lost his mind and spent 2 years in the darkness of madness and the absolute loneliness. I cannot sell this house because my unfortunate grandfather built it, because in it he was tormented by his hallucinations and wild delusions. But isn't it strange? It's like I'm going to change something in the past of our home by living in it today. We can change something only in the present. In my present, I bring my grandfather's cup from the summer kitchen into the house, wash it, and put it on the shelf next to the cups of my grandmother, mother, and father. The same way my mother once brought chess from the attic to my grandfather's house. He played by correspondence with dozens of similar amateurs throughout the country at that time and hung his photo on the wall in my former grandfather's room. Mom started, I have to continue. God has small things, but not small things. Small things produce consequences that are as much greater than themselves. The cat introduced me to Irina Ivanova. She is our village veterinarian. Mainly, Irina treats, of course, cows and pigs, but her heart is open to every suffering living being, those who have no one to take care of at all. She gathers in her house and yard. I don't know what I have done without Irina. When my white and fluffy cat caught scabies, a wet, inflamed, bald patch formed on her back. She was rapidly expanding her terrible possessions. Don't carry it to me, I will come to you myself. And she came to us on a bicycle with the dog Pulya sitting in a basket on the trunk, and her grandfather in front on the frame, and her granddaughter in the front on the frame. Together with me, she was raking the cat out from under the sofa. He hid as soon as he heard her steps. Who likes to be given injections? She calmed him down, and me. She did everything necessary and sternly warned, "You don't need any money." I immediately remembered the human nurse Veta, who at my tearful request came to a seriously ill, bedridden mother and did things that were not part of her duties. And what I myself did, what I did not succeed in, for example, excuse me, an enema, it is not at all as easy as it seems. When Sveta finally left us, I transferred money to her card, and she immediately transferred them back to me. For many years, I did not love my native village and did not appreciate the people living in it. She came reluctantly, and I tried to leave as soon as possible. It was sad. If there is life at all, then it is in the city. I was far away, even in my mature years, I would seem, from understanding whatever you have in life. It does not depend on whether you live in a city or in a village, as nun Euphemia told me in her time. If you have a high spiritual degree, you live. I have problems with this degree to this day, although I have already gone through so much and understood so much. Yes, it is really understood. The illness of my parents forced me to live in my native village for 3 years. Then the parents were gone, the house and the cat remained. Neither the house nor the cat could be abandoned willingly or unwillingly. I communicated with my fellow villagers, including our small Orthodox community, and realized that I had something in common with these people. The long, familiar word countrymen was filled with a lively, warm meaning for me. Our small Orthodox community gathers in an adapted, but not bad by rural standards, room at the end of the State Farm Administration building, or rather, no longer a state farm. What is left of the once large farm, the director of which was my grandfather, and which my parents worked all their lives, now bears the name of CJSC. And thanks to this Western Administrative District, I must say thanks to those people who preserved it during the years of the severe crisis. My mother's fields are not overgrown with weeds, but are with golden ears of grain. In July, I often go cycling to these fields. I look at the waves of ears, listen to their rustle, rejoice when I see the combines and trucks loaded with grain. I rejoice at the smell familiar from childhood, warm, fresh grain, and I feel how much I am still the daughter of an agronomist, although I have chosen a different path. I will return to the Orthodox parish. The room in which he gathers is very poor. It cannot be called a temple because it does not have an antimension. The liturgy is not celebrated without an animension. A priest who comes once a month from the district center celebrates Obednitsa with the communion of the laity. 100-year-old rusty candlesticks, a plywood altar screen, one pre-revolutionary icon that one of the parishioners brought. But there are more and more new icons for each holiday. We try to buy at least a small and cheap one. Recently, St. Mary of Egypt appeared, and before that, the Annunciation, the Meeting of the Lord, Seraphim of Surov, St. John of Kronstadt. When a priest who is busy in the district center cannot come, we gather on our own without him. We read the canon of the feast or the akathist to the saint. Sometimes we even read poems. For example, Yesenin's Mikola on the feast of St. Nicholas. At the beginning of Great Lent, we read the penitential canon. And every time I'm glad to see that people have gathered, that my cousin Sveta, who once gave us a white kitten, is also here, There are not so many parishioners compared to the population of the village, and they are mostly elderly women. But we do not live to see it. No, we live. Someone saved the field, someone saved their faith, someone saved the graves of soldiers who died in medical echelons at our deep rear station from oblivion and overgrowth. And all of us must preserve life in this place on the southeastern outskirts of Russia. And to save life, love is needed. Dislike is cutting oneself off from one's own roots and is no longer life, although not death yet. Death comes when repentance is no longer possible, when there is no more chest for you found in the attic, nor a white teacup that you can wash and put on a shelf next to all the others. My mother, Tatiana Iosovna, loved animals very much. She felt sorry for and saved whomever she could. It would be possible to write a whole chronicle of our home zoo, or rather a rehabilitation center for furry and feathered poor souls. At one time, we had an owl with a torn off wing. For some reason, his mother called him Suryosa. Stern Suryosa walked around the yard and only took pieces of meat from her hands. We also had a great crested grabe. It swam in a trough because these birds cannot walk on the ground at all. We released the great crested grabes on a distant pond, and the owl somehow came out of the yard and was killed by a neighbor's dog. Several times my mother took the bunnies from the village boys, and after a short rest and feeding them with milk, took them to the field. And how many magpies, rooks, and jackdaws we fed, which for some reason always fell from their nest to the ground, innumerable. I remember how my mother rescued a weekend after wintering half dead, one might say, old turtle. She opened its mouth with her fingers and stuck pieces of apple into it. And our Penelope began to chew little by little and came to her senses. By the way, it was brought to us after a box with some pieces of iron fell on it and split its shell in half. So she lived with us for probably 10 years with a crack through the entire carapace. When I was a schoolgirl, my mother, let me remind you, an agronomist, often told me about animals that she saw in the field far from the village: hares, bustards, cranes, foxes. And this is a conversation between parents who are already very old people. Sasha, did you see my crow on the street? There are lots of crows out there. Which one's yours? You can always recognize mine. You call her Varka, Varka, and she will fly up for sure. This old Varka was offended by young tribeswomen, and her mother protected her. She fed her, driving away the impotent women. She also fed stray cats, and no one counted how many of them there were. My mother took care of the dying dog, Genghis Khan, who served us faithfully for 18 years as if he were a person. She gave him milk from a spoon, treated bed sores, covered him with a blanket. I also remember a little bat who somehow got into the house. She decided to spend her winter in her father's old hat, which had been hanging on a nail for a long time. The winterer was discovered when our cats gathered under this hat and began to jump, reaching for it with their paws. Mom arranged an insulated den for the mouse, but alas, the winged animal did not take up in the spring. And in her last photo is mother with a white cat. He sits on her lap. This picture is scary because my mother is looking at it. From there, her poem. A flightless rook lives in the garden. I go to him, I bring food. Someone offended this poor guy, or himself in a tough scrape. Stupidly, I got there by accident and broke the wing in it by accident. An ordinary rook, a simple bird, not a canary, not even. When healthy, he is a bandit. Here's the bird's verdict to the world. Now he is weak and abandoned in a flock, and the garden is covered with snow. And I go, I bring food, such is the way things are in the garden. He may be alone in the world once tamed. I am responsible. How much you look like your grandmother, an elderly teacher tells me. We met her in the school hallway in the village school. When I graduated from time immemorial, I now teach something like an Orthodox circle or elective. It is called a Sunday school, although it meets on Wednesdays. I don't really look like my grandmother, the one who quarreled with her husband, that is, with her grandfather all her life. But I am surprised by something else, that someone in our village still remembers her, who died in the early 90s. I don't remember her. I grew up next door to you, how much she studied with us, what performances we staged with her. This teacher is older than me. I know that their family lived in the next alley, but I don't remember any performances. Either I was too young then, or I was not yet at all. My grandfather really worked with children all her life. After graduating from kindergarten teacher courses in Leningrad, most likely in the early 30s, we later found this recommendation in my grandmother's dilapidated pre war purse. There was also a certificate of baptism of my future grandfather, 1896, the village of Gurniki in the western Belarus near Grodno, and a certificate of his marriage with my grandmother, and a boarding pass for one of the last evacuation trains leaving Leningrad. My grandmother kept this pass to her life, all her life as a shrine, and the recommendation given to the teacher Alexandria Ivanovna is a notebook sheet with a stamp, just a hasty handwritten note. So and so, they say, is literate and has an approach to children, children love her. And this recommendation helped. Once in East Kazakhstan in the foothills of Altai, my future grandmother got a job in a children's home and tuberculosis sanitarium. All my childhood, I listened to her stories about the little patients of this institution, about children's destinies broken twice by war and a terrible, almost incalculable disease at the time. But that's not the only thing my grandmother told me about. Also, about her pre revolutionary childhood. She was born in 1903. Because of my youth at that time and because of our ideological savagery, I did not understand what a treasure, what a source was next to me, a living person from that Russia. If I were older and smarter, I would have asked my grandmother about everything and everyone in detail, and I would remember her stories properly. As it is, there are fragments in my narrow memory. True, these scraps gave me a lot. My grandmother, Alexandra Ivanovna, came from ordinary people. Her mother was a Smolensk peasant. Her father was a St. Petersburg petty bourgeois. But her stories about her family, about her home, about her Dasha, about the church, and finally about the gymnasium were sharply dissonant with the concept of Tsarist Russia, which we Soviet children were tirelessly indoctrinated in. The oppression of Tsarism, exploitation, poverty, total illiteracy, terrible order in general, a nightmare, and long live the revolution. My grandmother told me about a good, bright life, for example, that in her gymnasium class, the princess and the daughter of a janitor who studied under a charity program sat at the same desk, and the class lady strictly watched that no disdainful tone slipped into the pupils in relation to the socially inferior. And my grandmother also told me about her father, my great grandfather, Ivan Ivanovich Vasiliev. He was an accountant by profession and a great bookworm at that, an amateur musician and a deeply religious man, a warden of the parish. He took all his children to church, explained everything that happened in it, taught them to pray at home. Ivan Ivanovich was widowed early. His wife, Marfa Yemelyanova, who was already mentioned, came from the Smolensk peasants, thanks to the local historian Evgeny Lebedev. I received a photocopy of their wedding record in 1902. Died of leukemia when the Vasilievs' eldest daughter, Alexandra, my future grandmother, was 13 years old. It was in 1916, and then grandmother remembered how she flew home from the gymnasium, waving her briefcase, how she ran to the house and shouted loudly, "Dad, the Tsar has been arrested at the Dno station." Well, what are you happy about? And this voice of her father, these words of his sounded in her ears all her life. The marriage of my grandmother and grandfather turned out to be unhappy. Yes, they probably never felt much love for each other. Then in 1924, 21-year-old Sasha was already a complete orphan. In Hungary and cold Petrograd, she survived by giving lessons in Russian and French. And after all, 4 classes of the gymnasium were with her, but she didn't even have a winter coat, only an insulated jacket. And she probably just needed to nail someone so as to not disappear. And Joseph Matyukevich, Yuzik, as he introduced himself to everyone in Polish for some reason, still studied at the Agricultural Institute, looked smart, was in good standing with the new government, and soon joined the party. and he survived in 37 when half of the agricultural trust in which my grandfather served and half the trust house were planted. Then, in the last years of his life and the years of my madness, my grandfather often returned to that black year and said to my grandmother, "Shura, pack your suitcase tonight, they will come for me." Grandmother cursed in response and shouted, "What are you talking about? Who will come for you?" Even to a sick, pitiful, dying person, she could not forgive that very ruined life. Did God forgive her, my poor grandmother? No, she did not preserve her father's faith. When I was growing up, she told me that there is no God. She laughed at her peers in the village who gathered at home for secret prayer. It was dark, but when my grandmother died, my mother and I found on the bedside table near her bed a piece of paper with clumsy letters and a simple pencil, "Our Father who art in heaven." She remembered this prayer by heart from the gymnasium lessons of the law of God. Many years after my grandmother's death, when I myself finally matured to the point where I was baptized and took communion, at least as a child, a person needs to be buried. The funeral service spontaneously fell on her birthday, which is also the day of her heavenly patroness, the holy martyr Alexandra of Ancyra. The believing father named his firstborn daughter strictly after the saints. This coincidence gives me hope. After all, its probability was 1 to the number of days in a year. It could hardly have been accidental. The Lord told me that it was possible and necessary to pray for Alexandra as well as for every person. Of the entire state farm which was raised after the war by my grandfather, in which my parents worked, only Valentina Ivanovna, an accountant, the widow of a doctor. This is how we called the state farm veterinarian Vladimir Konstantinovich, who died a month before my mother. Valentina Ivanova lives next door to me, with difficulty leaning on a stick, but she still walks, tries to walk a little in the evenings. And I paint the fence because this is my goal now, to prevent our yard from becoming dilapidated and desolate. Hello, Valentina Ivanovna. What a good job you are for walking. Do you dream of your mother? No. So she's fine there. You don't need anything. There indeed nothing is needed anymore. Folk legends, for example, about a girl buried in high-heeled shoes and asked to pass comfortable slippers with the next deceased, can only cause a sad smile. But sometimes it seems to me that even there, in the still unresolved realm of the souls, they can suffer, these souls, because here on earth they have not received love, but have received lovelessness, especially if from the closest, and when they can really come to us involuntarily in dreams. I did not give my mother enough love. I did not act with her out of love, though maybe I'm making excuses now. But how much I still fought for love. Completely exhausted, she forced herself to get out of bed. Once again in the middle of the night, come up to her, stroke her head, make it clear that she was not alone. She gently soothed at the lowest and most pitiful manifestations of her infirmity. Either she conquered her egoism or suffered a terrible defeat. If I don't dream about my mother, it's not because I'm not to blame for her, but because she's forgiven me. In the work of my father, Alexander Ivanovich Buryukov, there's only one entry: an electrician of the Pushkinsky State Farm, from returning from the army and until retirement. It was always difficult for me to work with him, except perhaps in early childhood, when he himself was still very young and read books aloud to me. But with age, his strange character grew, hardened. He was very reserved, silent, the only person in my life who said something out loud only out of practical necessity, but not for the sake of simple communication like all of us. He never told anything, neither about his military childhood nor about his parents. He grew up in a large family, simple peasant. His father, my grandfather Ivan Timofeyevich, went through the war, as they say, from bell to bell. He fought heroically, was awarded the Medal for Courage and the Order of the Red Banner of Battle. Thanks to the search for my cousin Valerie, I was able to read both the orders for the award and the frontline party characteristic of Comrade Biryukov. He knows no fear and fatigue, a cheerful, initiative warrior. However, when Ivan returned home, he began to drink, and the farther from the war, the more. And in the end, he hanged himself in his house. I don't know, maybe this affected the character of the father, his oldest son. Yes, in everyday communication, my father was not, as they say, a gift. He did not accept and did not love his wife's parents, that is, my grandparents. Because of this, we did not have what every person needs so much at the beginning of his life, a warm, strong, loving family. He treated my grandmother like a servant, a cook. He silently ate the soup served by her and left without saying thank you. Once I remember I barked at her exactly as at a servant, a bad worker, when it seemed to him that the spoon was not washed well. My grandmother was afraid to enter the room from the kitchen. By the way she slept in the kitchen, the bed was in the corner. To watch TV because my father did not like it when strangers were in the room. I saw all this. I loved my grandfather, and my father's attitude towards her caused me terrible pain. But at the same time, I knew that he loved me for all the oddities of his character, for all my resentment for my grandmother, for the fact that, as I have already said, it was difficult and unfree for me to be with my father. I always knew that this silent, tough as it seems man was ready to give me everything on occasion, leaving nothing for himself. Although, of course, I would not take this everything, I would never accept any sacrifices from my parents at all. It was enough for me to know if I had any difficulties in life, my father would help me, and I, of course, would always help him too. His father had an education, a correspondence technical school, but at the same time, interestingly, he read a lot. I remember him with a book in his hands, reclining on the sofa. I don't know on what principle he chose books for himself, but there was no reading in our house. Sometimes he read poems, Gumilev, Bunin, David Semilov. He was not interested in spiritual literature, but sometimes unexpected things happened. For example, he took a book of spiritual poems by Natalia Anufreva from me, read a page or two, and suddenly asked me to leave this book to him, not to take it away. And the same was with a book of prose by Sergei Duryulin. Who knows what was going on inside this man, behind the wall of his eternal sullen silence? A certain turning point in the father's character occurred after the death of his mother, Natalia Andreevna. Children and grandchildren came to the funeral and sorted out their grandmother's poor things. Someone got a sewing machine, someone got an old washing machine, and we got a cat. Until then, my father did not like cats and mercilessly chased them away, which terribly traumatized both me and my grandmother on my mother's side. It came to tears, and not only children's, but this three-colored kitty, which we named Katya. Grandmother Natalia called her Mirka, mysteriously changed my father's attitudes towards cats in general. She curled up comfortably on his lap. She slept with him. She took pieces off his fork as he ate. When Katya died, her father buried her, carefully wrapping her in his old sweater. And all our subsequent cats behaved the same way as this Katya. Grandfather, as they began to call their father then, became really a grandfather for them, infinitely affectionate and pampering. However, I think that he would treat not only cats, but also my grandmother and even my grandfather, if they have lived to see this change in his character. But they left before Natalia Andreevna. Before his death, the father became a helpless child, suddenly, quietly, and meekly accepting his infirmity. I had to wash him, take him to the toilet, change his clothes, and he trusted me, completely ceasing to be shy, and he didn't ask what pills I put in his mouth in the morning. He probably didn't care anymore. Or maybe I became something like a mother for him, from whom he did not receive tender care in due time, but not through her fault, but through the fault of a harsh, half-starved life. And the white kitten, fluffy like a dandelion, climbed the old man like a tree, climbed on his head and tried to make herself comfortable at this observation post. Dad meekly tolerated this and did not even allow me to remove the kitten from his head. I am glad that my father died in my arms, that I, as they say, took my last breath. I am glad that the last words that he heard from his daughter were, "You are not alone, I am with you." I said exactly this when my father was trying to reach the toilet, collapsed on the floor, and fidgeted for some time trying to get up with my help, and then his hand slipped helplessly from my neck and hit the floor. Twice a year in October and May, the days of my parents' death, I pay for all the bread in 2 village shops so that all those who come can take bread for free. It seems to me that this is the best way to remember the people who have worked all their lives on this salty steppe land. Next January, in the same way, I will remember another grain grower, my grandfather Joseph. Once already at the end of her life, my mother confessed to me that she was punishing herself for not giving me enough attention and love in my childhood, not establishing spiritual contact with me. Yes, in childhood and especially adolescence, I felt lonely, misunderstood, unlistened to. I had too many shortcomings, ineptitudes, and problems. At every step, I could not cope with what every person at a certain age must cope with. I needed support, and if I didn't get it, why is that? Yes, my mother worked very hard from April to October, almost 7 days a week, from dawn to dawn. Such was the life in the state farm. We just saw my mother very little, and when she finally appeared at home, she was too tired and could no longer communicate with anyone. But the main reason for our failure to meet our parallelism with both mother and father is still not this. We are children of war. Our parents themselves grew up like grass in a field. Who understood them, who listened to them, who warmed them, instructed, taught them everything that's needed in life. They learned everything themselves, defended themselves, and were responsible for themselves. In a word, they lived on their own, starting from an early age. And when we became parents having no other good experience, they unconsciously transferred the experience of their military childhood to us. We also had to live on our own, to learn everything on our own, to become the right person on our own. We must and we are to blame if we do not cope. By the way, my mother did not like the expression children of war. We are not children of war, she said. War is not the mother at all. War is a stepmother. For us, the war has become a non native grandmother. No one should be blamed for your underfeeding, not physical but mental. And you don't need to blame yourself either, no matter how strange it sounds. No one knows the line separating misfortune from guilt. Repentance is not self criticism, it has nothing to do with an inferiority complex. Repentance is finding of oneself and finding love. But what can your love do today if your loved ones are already forever yesterday? When you find love, you change yourself. You learn to understand, forgive, appreciate, respect, and love, finally, other people. And there will be enough of these people on your way to those last steps. I am no better than any of my relatives, not at all. I'm simply trying to gather stones and save my parents' garden. Ecclesiastes 3:4. Do you remember Durylin's words? There was a garden childhood and a child was a garden. Our garden served as a vegetable garden at the same time among the apple trees, cherries and raspberry bushes, tomatoes bloomed with yellow stars, carrots fluffed their tails, beets rustled with juicy red-green leaves, potatoes secretly grew their tubers. But better than we, of course, the apples, especially the white liquor as I remember them, cracked from heat and ripeness, clinging to wasps, soft and hot from the sun. And Chinese women are tart yellow apples the size of a walnut, and golden eagle, anise, and late anatovka are the joy of autumn. Yes, half of my holidays were spent picking cherries, red currants, and gooseberries. It was my duty, and I whined, but it doesn't matter. The garden was childhood, and childhood was kindergarten. My parents fought for this garden until they became weak. After another hyper-intensive crisis, my mother dragged irrigation hoses through the steppe, heat and leveled irrigation circles with a hoe. I lived and worked in the city, helped them very little. Sometimes my mother called and offered one of my city friends to come to our village and fill the trunk of her car with apples. There was simply nowhere else to put them. And then my parents, as already mentioned, fell down one after another. And for 3 years in a row, I had no time for kindergarten at all. It took me 4 years to come to my senses. Only 5 years later, I took up the resuscitation of an orchard overgrown with weeds and terribly desolate, in which all the cherries had already died. Raspberries and gooseberries died. Only 3 apple trees and one very old pear remained. The most difficult for me now is to clear this garden from dried wood, from dead grass and branches. From a damp, dense layer of foliage, my grandfather planted maples around the perimeter of the garden, cut out all the dry parts of the crowns and the root shoots which stand in a dense forest. There is nowhere to put the dried grass. It accumulates, forming huge heaps, gets damp, and does not burn. Weeds, velcro, sow thistle, horse sorrel, dandelion, aggressive and indestructible. I'm very tired of this work. My garden gloves are burning. I buy new ones all the time. My back hurts, but it stubbornly seems to me that my mother sees that I have not abandoned the kindergarten, and she is happy about it. And its fields are not abandoned. It is not overgrown with weeds, and the garden is in work, and the cat ended his days not in the garbage, but in the warmth on a sod. Come, I'll show you where we buried him. The white cat died without me. I went on a business trip to Kazan. Before that, he was very ill. But Irina Ivanovna and I cured him, so it seemed to us. It only seemed, alas. When leaving, I entrusted the cat in the house to Olya and Volodya, to my relatives and neighbors. They helped me constantly. Olya helped me out in the most difficult times of mother's illness. It was she who found the cat on father's bed, dead. She was upset because she loved him, just like me. I called when I was returning to the village from Saratov, and so Volodya showed me a grave in the corner of the garden right next to the fence. Then you'll do it better, plant something there. It's March, the ground is thawed, black. Wind behind the fence, the pond rustles and squelches with its ice flows. The crowns of poplars shudder, already thick and dark from swollen buds. Roosters and cats crow in neighboring yards. The second spring without a mother, the fourth without a father. Without a cat, there will be the first. Yes, a cat is not a person you can't compare. I already know this very well. A cat is small compared to a person, but small does not mean small. God has small things, but not small things. And while Jesus was reclining in the house, many publicans and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your master eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" And when Jesus heard this, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what it means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I have come to call the righteous, not the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Matthew 9:10 through 12. Saying that I desire mercy and not sacrifice, the Lord quotes the ancient book of the prophet Hosea, but there is also a continuation. For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. Hosea 6:6. We will not surprise him with our sins. He's always ready to accept our repentance and share a meal with us so that we may come to know him. He wants us to know him. The response of our hearts to what is known is love. And love for him and direct experience of his love for us is a very perfect joy that he bequeathed to us, John 15:11, and which according to his word no one can take away from us, John 16:22. This is what I'm going to, it turns out, to this joy. Until I got there, but I will not stop as long as I have at least an hour left on earth. In an hour, everything can change for a person. Marina Buryakova. God bless you, brothers and sisters. Thanks for joining me. I love you all, and God bless.